Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Welcome to Crime Redefined. Today's guest is just perfect for our podcast. She truly bridges crime and entertainment.
This is true, Dion. We've got the honor today of talking to a friend of mine, Nikki Hevesy, who's an award-winning director, writer, and producer. Nikki's worked on documentaries, short films, multi-camera presentations, and even music videos. So today she's going to talk to us about how one of her criminal justice projects actually drew her deep into the world of post-conviction investigations.
Through her work recording gang intervention, Nikki has immersed herself deep into gang culture and the Los Angeles criminal justice system. Mehul, I know you've been working with her, and I'm curious to see if she has some of the same observations that you do about the system.
Yeah, as am I. And since Nikki is that type of guest that we can cover a lot of topics with, let me just kind of set the stage for our interview. So Nikki was working on chronicling the efforts of reformed gang members who are basically interventionists, and they would try to save young people from that life or just diffuse some of the gang violence. One of the men she was following by the name of Charles Slim Holmes, he ended up getting picked up on a murder charge that Nikki just did not see coming. And as you'll hear, she soon became Slim's biggest advocate in his journey to justice. So here's a little taste of Nikki's work featuring an interview with an LAP detective talking about Slim's case.
Johnny Ray Thomas was shot on the corner of 93rd and Avalon. I was one of the lead detectives on that case. We had several 911 calls from residents that lived right in the vicinity of the gunshots. And then, of course, there was simultaneously a broadcast from the patrol officers that picked up the SUV and followed it. Not knowing at first that it was initially related to the murder. I had a very strong suspicion from the first night that our suspect was Charles Holmes.
On top of all that, Nikki directed a poignant short film shot in Watts that is getting a lot of attention on the festival circuit. Okay, fans, get ready for a wild ride because, as always, we're bringing you inside the action with a first-hand account from Nikki Hevesy.
Well, Nikki, thanks so much for joining us today on Crime Redefined.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I've known you for a little bit, and what you do is so fascinating.
Yeah, and you know what? The tables are turned, right? Because normally you're interviewing me.
Right. That's true. Yes. Yes. You're part of a documentary, a very long-term documentary that I've been filming intermittently between other projects that will hopefully come to fruition soon. I guess when you're dealing with crime and documentary, it's like you start and then it's like, if I put this out now, is this going to help or hurt? Maybe we better pause again. So it's been a lot of stop and start as new evidence and things have come forth of putting it on pause to prioritize safety and, good things coming out of it. So,
right.
But thank you for being a part of that. Yeah. So for any listeners, Mehul's been like the DNA expert on this true crime docuseries that journal that I've been working on for a long time.
It sounds like, hey, Nikki, this is Dion. It sounds like you and Mehul go way back, and he's talked so much about you over the years. And I'm excited to finally get to know you. And I've studied, checking out your background a little bit, and see that you studied theology as an undergrad and then went on to study theater and directing. What prompted you to get into the showbiz?
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite in that order. I actually started off in theater and as an undergrad, and that was I grew up in New York City in Manhattan, and so that's your life. Acting classes when you're 6, and
right.
Duke Ellington was my upstairs neighbor, and my mom worked in the business end of show business. So, a funny story, real short, but my mom told me when I was like 6 years old or 5 years old, I was watching television and there was a child actor being interviewed And they asked him how he was like 12, and they asked him how old he was when he got his start. And he said he had done a Gerber's baby commercial when he was a year old. And I went running into the bedroom apparently. And I told my mom, Mommy, so-and-so got his start at a year old. And here I am 5 and I haven't done anything yet. She's like, yeah, you're a real husband. So, so I think, sort of in your blood, like, we all have sort of things that have a thumbprint on us, like Tiger Woods was golfing at the age of 3, So in terms of, arts and acting or directing, or, just the theater, it was always just in me. And so as in college, that was my major as an undergrad. And then I had this epiphany really and encounter with God and thought, I really need to learn about, theology and God. So I did both of them at the same time. I actually was going to finish my theater. I was at San Francisco State in the morning doing theater and then driving across town to the seminary doing theology classes. So emerging of that undergrad. And then I directed a theater company for 5 years in San Francisco. We did a lot of large scale musicals and then worked with several other companies up there, ADing Berkeley Rep and Vita Shakespeare. And then I realized, I also wanted to expand and learn film and TV. And so I came to LA and then I went to grad school at USC and did a sort of hybrid theater and film schools both. I was like a guinea pig student. So that's it. So that's how that happened.
So let me ask you this. Have you brought the two together? In other words, in your entertainment career, have you been involved in faith-based projects?
Oh, yes. Well, yes and no. I mean, so, there's been this genre that's emerged called faith-based entertainment over the last decade and a half. And I kind of have tracked that because I was in the leadership of a group which is not around anymore called Bel Air Arts and Entertainment Community. And we hosted above the line talent in that specific arena, a faith-based arena. Not just that, but we also had a lot of studio red carpet premieres up in Bel Air. And part of that really was tracking the emergence of that whole thing. So I have done 3 different years with Anne Marie Gillen, who's a sort of the business side of things, have done webinars, seminars, all day things on creating and marketing faith and family-based entertainment, really have a good understanding of that market, how it's emerged. But as a director, producer, creative, when you say, have I done a lot of faith-based? Unfortunately, until recently, a lot of those projects are kind of, I don't want to say preaching to the choir, but they are very insular, a lot of them, and they're successful. And it's only been in the past couple of years that there's been a lot of, because of the huge success of some of the films that now are, a little more what I would call faith adjacent, faith friendly. They're not sort of hit you over the head kind of things.
Right,
so right. Subgenres. And so, yes, I've been involved in a lot of projects that I feel are what I would say advancing the kingdom of God, that are social justice oriented, that are things that have to do with justice and truth and humanity. And occasionally over the years, I've been hired to do projects like I did several years ago. I did a TV special on interfaith marriages between Jewish and Gentile couples, which at that time was, sort of going over the top. And it was a lot of, I'd say, secular, just, non-believing people got married from different backgrounds and they'd start having kids and all these issues would come up that nobody expected and nobody wanted to talk about, and so it was a very interesting topic. So, I have a lot of expertise in both of those arenas, both film and TV and theater, and then also theology. And I do speak a lot and speak on Jewish roots of faith a lot and do a lot of, so consulting.
Tell us a little bit more about your early days in theater. What were some of your career highlights?
Well, I did, like I said, I ran a theater company. I sort of, in terms of places where I like AD'd and got trained in the Bay Area, I was like a Bay Area intern. I worked at Vita Shakespeare Festival, which a lot of those people now run a company down here called A Noise Within in Pasadena, which is a fantastic classical company, and Berkeley Rep. And then when I first started directing, you're so young and you don't realize you're ready to jump off mountains. It's like, let's do a show. So I did like really big shows and, original musicals. I worked with music director was he was in Santana and Country Joe and the Fish, and was classically trained as well, and played with Buddy Miles. So we would like write shows, and then we did some, non-original shows like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. There's a great musical about that. A lot of big, large-scale musicals, and I directed Shakespeare and non-musical stuff and comedy. I have a pretty good background directing comedy. You wouldn't know it with all the crime stuff, right?
Yeah, you're full of surprises.
But I directed Pirates of Penzance and Guys and Dolls, all your typical shows in terms of a lot of musicals. But then, comedies, both original and things like Musical Comedy Murders of the 1940, or, a lot of shows you wouldn't have heard because they're like original. They were original things that I worked with in Orange County and Los Angeles, and got, critics pick and lots of great reviews and all that good stuff. So that's it. So, and then when I moved to LA, I really wanted to learn film. And before I went back to grad school, my first job here, I think I had 2 jobs. Was the art department coordinator. They didn't have an art director. So I did all the budgeting and scheduling for one of the Amityville horror movie remakes.
Oh, cool.
And that was pretty fun, like watching all the people getting sucked through walls and how they do all that, because my boss was right on set. And then I was like Melanie Griffith, stand in on a film, was standing next to Brian De Palma. So that was when I said, I really need to learn this more formally and, finish up my MFA.
Well, let me ask you this, Nikki. When I met you, gosh, I think it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
At that point, you were knee deep into exploring gangs and gang intervention and actually Slim's case. So, how did you first end up getting involved in doing this documentary on gang intervention?
Yeah, good question. So let me just say, the very first time I met you, Mehul, you may not remember, but you were at a Denny's and you were giving a lecture.
Yes, I do remember that.
Yes, to a number of
investigators.
Yeah. And while I was there with one of the people that ran like a inner city gang school to get kids off the streets. And Kimmy, she now runs something called Big Dog, dealing with youth at risk. But I think she had told me about it. And and I was like, this is fascinating. And you were such a great speaker and all of that. So that's how we first connected. Okay, to answer your question, and if my answers are too long, just interrupt me.
No, you're doing fine now. Okay. Great detail. Well,
I was asked to direct a documentary on a particular individual. I won't say their name because it didn't go as well as we would have liked.
Understood.
But it was an individual who was had presented himself that he was doing like gang intervention. He was a peacemaker. He was going into the pueblos, and he was a reformed gang member, and it was in the Latino community. And I really had not a lot of interest, but I was trying to help my friend out, so she ran a little film school. She was more of an administrator. So we met for lunch a couple times, and I said, look, I'll just do a really well shot interview with him, and we'll see where it goes. And then you can have that. And when you get it funded, whatever. So we did that. And right around that time, he started talking about some things that were getting ready to launch. And he was working with other reformed gang members from different territories, Bloods, Crips. He was from Florencia 13, which is now Florencia. And they had all sort of, even though their families at one time probably killed each other, they had all sort of had their lives turn around, and for different reasons. Some came to Jesus, some had families, some had grew up, had been in prison, but something significant had happened that turned their lives around. And now they were working together across these enemy lines to help forge peace. And so that was what I started getting really interested in. And right at the same time, and my friend was not so interested. She dropped out of the project. And so we started following 4 guys from these different gangs. And right at the same time, the city of Los Angeles had started this gang intervention training academy. Do you know about that, Mehul?
Only from your work.
Oh, okay. Yeah. At the time, it was under the Advancement Project. It's now under the Urban Peace Institute. And it was all under the Gang Reduction Youth Development was emerging in LA, the Summer Night Lights program, which were keeping the parks open and using reformed gang members to create safety so families were there. So all of this stuff was happening at the same time. And my associate producer, we looked in the paper and she's like, there's a graduation for a gang intervention training academy and there's pictures of all the guys you're following in here. And I'm like, what? So we got permission to film there. And that's where I started meeting a lot of the leaders in the community. You know, Mayor Villaraigosa was there, and our former, who is it? Our former sheriff that was, I think, incarcerated for
Baca.
Yeah. Yes.
Inmate Baca.
Inmate Baca. Yes. So, and then some of the leaders of organizations like Chapter 2. And there was so much, I wasn't really absorbing it. So that's what happened. And we were following 4 guys. And that documentary, let me tell you what wound up happening with that, and then we can jump to a different topic. This new model of peace that was being forged as crime was plummeting in Los Angeles. And it was really sort of a community policing model. And out of that, I wound up getting sort of umbrellaed at one point by the city of LA and the former deputy mayor, Guillermo Cespedes, who sort of opened the doors for me to go everywhere. So we started then seeing it, not just from the gang intervention side, but then seeing it from the city side, the city of LA. And then they started, shortly after that, they started a training for the LAPD to train them on how to, actually having some reformed gang members training them on how to fight crime. And at the time, I can talk about it a little bit. At the time, it was really hush hush. I was like the only one in there. I wasn't able to film that, but it was fascinating. And, it was really, and a lot of these guys, they're not going to talk to the police because they don't want to be perceived as informants or snitches, and they don't want to lose their street credibility. So they have a lot or life, right? Well, they have a lot of street credibility because, they were gang leaders or, and they've served all this time. And so they have sort of what's called a license to operate that gives them the clout with, people in the community. But now they're fighting for peace. They're trying to stop the retaliations. And so let's say you're a Blood and I'm a Crip, and a shooting happens, and we're both informed as our 2 gang subsets. We get on the phone and you go find out what happened in your neighborhood. I'll go find out what happened in mine. And we really are stopping the retaliation and stopping things from escalating. So you can't really quantify that. It's not like, well, we had 400 murders that didn't happen this year.
Right.
But you can see it in the statistics that it plummeted around that time. Crime started going down, and then people started coming from all over the world looking at LA's model of peace. And in order for that to happen, the police really had to step back for 48 hours, which not a lot of them weren't too keen on doing. So there's a big learning curve there, with the community policing. So that's how it kind of started. And I started developing relationships, and I started becoming very enamored with the leadership skill that these guys had, because even though they were at one time gang leaders, the leadership part stayed, even though the criminal part fell off, and the crime part. And so, really developed a good deal of respect for these guys who were sacrificing their lives, putting themselves on the line, doing intervention, which was stopping the retaliation, standing between the body and a bullet, but also doing prevention with the youth and trying to, doing safe passage on the way to school, so these kids aren't getting in at-risk situations or getting jumped into gangs, that kind of stuff. So that's it. So I started attending different meetings and, developed relationships over the years, just trying to help where I could if there were resources that were needed. And that's how that happened.
Do you have any issues while filming? Any close calls when you got on the street?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, when I started this, I think I'm fairly savvy now, even though I listen a lot, but when I first started, I just didn't have a clue really. And so, we did have people with us. We'd never go anywhere alone, and so I kind of had a pass because of the people we were with when we were filming.
When you say people, can you, a little more detail?
Yeah. Well, gang,
okay.
The gang. So in each territory, there are certain people that would have, let's say, a licensed operator or a pass, because they're from that community and they're known and they're respected. So you can't just go, oh, well, I have a reformed gang member with me and go to some area where they're not, from that territory. So it was really being with whatever person was vetted in that area and would vet us. And then we would listen to them like, okay, a few times, like walk away from camera equipment, or we'd have camera equipment out. We'd stand there, and one of the guys would be like, you need to keep that in the car. We're like, oh, we're here. Yeah, if somebody could just come up with a gun and take it away, I wouldn't do that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like just things that were like learning curves. But what happened, one of the guys, and I won't, like, again, I don't want to mention any names or anything, but one of the key people that we were following, we did so much press with this person, for this person. He became sort of a known entity, like a mini celebrity, and agents and managers started calling him. And sometimes Hollywood and gangsters don't mix so well. So, so a lot of our agreements were broken. And unbeknownst to us, while we were filming, there were other things being done, like behind our back, that we didn't. And when we found out, we were like, "What?" So that's what kind of put a stop to that. And so what I did with that project, I turned the concept, not the literal story, but the concept, into a scripted series, which is called Murder Disrupted, and it was accepted pre-pandemic into the Producers Guild Diversity Development Program. So it was a series that was developed there. And it's really a look at this community that people have never seen before. It's sort of a different flip on a police show,
Right.
So I had a showrunner attached previously, but he's now on a major series that everybody would know and not available. So we were just getting ready to take it out and try to get it packaged, find a showrunner who's either Black or Latino, to make sure the right, or a combination, so the right voices are in it. And then the writer's strike hit. So I'm hoping after the writer's strike resolves that we'll be able to get this out. We had a lot of interest. Of course, I pitched it at Harvey Weinstein's company. That's not happening.
You just have no luck.
Oh my God, Jamie Tarsis was interested. She passed away in February. So, there's been a lot of interest, and it's a very unique series. And I'm really excited because I feel like it's an opportunity to look into a world and look at some street heroes that people have never really seen before.
So I think, as a good segue, tell us now a little bit about Charles Holmes, AKA Slim. What's his backstory, and what was he like working with when you first met him?
Okay, great story. So while I was doing this documentary, one of the other things that put a little kink in it is one of the four guys we were following. His name was Charles Holmes, AKA Slim. And shortly after we started, and he was just this sort of nice, quiet spoken, keep like quiet leadership, really nice guy, and working with youth and talking about how he wanted to make a difference. He had formerly been incarcerated for, I think, bank robbery when he was like 23 or 22 or something. And now was like in his 30s. And he had a lot of these guys start doing the work from prison. So he had a big turnaround while he was incarcerated and was doing a lot of sort of peacemaking work from inside the prison. So he was a known entity. So when he got out, he and his best childhood friend, Melvin, they began volunteering at an organization, a nonprofit that did intervention.
And we're in about 2008, 9 now?
2009, end of 2009. Yeah, 2009. And they were volunteering. That's how we met them, because they were a couple of the guys we were following. And then all of a sudden, we heard that this guy was arrested for murder. I'm like, what? So, at that point, I didn't really know a lot of dynamics. So, my first thought is like, wow, like maybe he got sucked back into some life, or, I didn't know what was going on, but it just seemed so unlikely given who we had gotten to know him to be. So just doing my due diligence as a producer, we went to the court and we got permission to film at the pretrial, and a lot of really funky things happened that just, any average fair layperson would be like, this is interesting. So I can tell you a teeny bit about, if you want me to give you a quick summary, or I don't know if you go into that crime stuff or not here.
Yeah, actually, it's a good segue into my next question, which is, how did you become so, integral into Slim's case. But previous to that, did you have any experience working with the criminal justice system?
Zero. I mean, other than, a class action lawsuit, I was in, and being on a jury once, so other than that, not really. I mean, actually, when I was a teenager, I was in juvenile hall for a week for getting suspended from school. So
well, that's kind of severe for man.
Well, that's a whole story in of itself. But it was actually, I was put on probation for something I did that wasn't really a crime, but it was a whole political thing. I was like 14, and it's a long story. It's a little bit of a diversion, but part of the probation was if I got suspended from high school, I had to spend that week in a detention center.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out Nikki does have street cred.
Bank. Yeah, it wasn't like I robbed a bank or anything. Really, all we did is we were throwing. I'll tell you a real quick story. We had moved to Florida my last year of high school, and I was a couple of years ahead in school, and we were taking a bus because the school hadn't been built yet, that we were going to the high school, and the bus driver was like horrific. She would like tell people like, move it, fatso. And she was really nasty to people. So the school had gotten finally built, and it was our last day of taking the bus. So I, got a whole crew of people together. We were going to like get back at her. And so we got like smoke bombs and firecrackers. And my brother was riding along on his bicycle, throwing eggs at the window. Well, she kicked everybody off the bus. And we had somebody with a pickup truck following. We got a ride to school, but everybody else walked, and one of the girls got hit by a car. Now, nothing happened to her. She was fine. But her father, maybe a decade before, 2 decades before, had been the head of the anti-busing, anti-segregation. So this is over the front page of the papers, and it's postured that students try to blow up a school bus, which was absurd.
Oh, my gosh.
So what happened is they did this whole investigation, and I was one of the, sort of catalysts getting everybody to do this. And so that's how I got.
You were the ringleader.
I was the ringleader. So not exactly a high crime, but so that's been my only really, interface. So, okay. So back to Slim. So
tell us how you got, so involved with this case.
Okay. So, we went to the court trial, and the first things that happened, the basis of the trial, there's a government informant, also known as a snitch, gets up on the stand, and there's this whole story. And the basis of this murder, this person who was murdered, whose name is, I think I can say it's public, was Johnny Ray Thomas. And this person who was murdered, the whole story is that the guy on the witness stand, the snitch, he had been an informant, and they postured him like he was a hero, he'd turned in 100 Crips, and he'd helped the police, and he'd done all this stuff. And now there was what they call a green light on his life, meaning like something on your head to kill you if he goes back to the neighborhood. So, of course, the first thing you're thinking is, well, wait a minute, you're not dead. You're alive and testifying. Nobody killed you. Oh, well, actually what happened is in the hours leading up to the murder, which was at 2 a.m., Johnny Ray Thomas, who was his former cellmate and buddy, they wanted him to turn over the snitch, and he wouldn't turn the snitch over. So instead they killed Johnny Ray Thomas. And you're like, oh, wait, okay, wow, does that happen? They're asking the gang expert, have you ever heard of that happen before? He's like, no, there's not any example I can point to, but that's only because anybody would be afraid to testify about it. Oh, okay. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing, the trial attorney gets up and he says, well, how do you know my client? He says he's never met you. Oh, we did this gun deal together in 2003, and I wore a wire, and that's what he's mad about. And he says, well, my client was incarcerated in 2003. Oh, it was 2002. Well, he was incarcerated in 2002.
Solid alibi.
Yeah. So he leans across the courtroom and looks at Slim, and he goes, oh, it's a different Slim. Well, it turns out there's like 5-10 Slims in every subset. There's newborn.
I would think, yeah.
Slim dad, whatever. But they just kept going with the case. So I'm like, just as a layperson, I'm like, oh, this is kind of odd. And then another witness gets up and testifies that she saw this the murderer's getaway car crash, and she saw this person limping, one black male limping from this truck, and for 2 years a year, she couldn't identify him because it was too far away. And in court, she couldn't identify him. She leaves the court with the police, comes back an hour later and says, "Oh, it was him. Now I saw him from the side."
Yeah, funny how that happens. A little bit of coaching going on there.
And, I didn't know. I'm just listening to this, but I'm thinking this is kind of unusual. So just because of that, my gut feeling, I thought, well, I should probably get interviews with everybody. So I did. I interviewed the expert. I interviewed the LAPD. I interviewed the victim's mom, and I just put it aside. And so flash forward a few years later, I was wrapping out the documentary, and we had ordered a lot of the transcripts and things like that in case I needed it. And anyway, so what happened was, over the years, without getting into too much detail, people just talk to you and they tell you things, and I'm putting things together and I'm hearing things, and started thinking this man might be innocent. And so I was up at a baby shower for a friend up in Sacramento. I'd never been in a prison before, but he was at the time incarcerated in Folsom Prison. And I thought, I should be a good citizen and go visit this man and bring him quarters. And he went in court. He never presented any alibi. He never testified. He never, he never said anything. His lawyer, his trial attorney, was disbarred shortly thereafter. There was very little presented in terms of, nothing in terms of an alibi or witnesses. And so it turned out the trial attorney was actually representing himself at the same time, because he was under investigation because he was a little preoccupied,
I would say.
So when I went to go visit Slim in prison, I had already heard so many things that he would never know I knew. And I'm like, what happened? And he's like, I don't know. I wasn't there. And then he said 2 or 3 things that corroborated stuff that I had been told that I knew were facts. And I thought, okay, this guy's probably telling the truth. So that's what started. So he asked me to help him. And I said, if I did do something, it was going to be from an objective point of view, from a journalistic, did he or didn't he do this? I said, and you may not like that, because people are going to, if it goes out, they're going to talk about you, and, it's going to present both sides of the case and all that. And he said, okay. And so that's how that started. And over the course of the time of working on this intermittently, there's been a lot that's happened, a lot of witnesses that have come forward, things that have become pretty clear. And I believe he's wrongfully convicted. So
yeah. I know that, from keeping up with you about this case and being involved, that the work you're doing, although you didn't set out to do it, you're essentially like a post-conviction investigator, almost like what the Innocence Project would do. And so you've talked about some of the shocking things in Slim's case, but I know that you've, been around the attorneys, the district attorney, the jails, the investigators. What are some of the things that have shocked you about the LA justice system?
Well, first of all,
long list, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a long list. And you probably know these things, but did you know that police are allowed to lie or say anything they want to get a confession?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I don't think most people know that.
Right.
The very first thing I was reading this interrogation of Slim's at the time girlfriend, and I'm reading this, and they're like doing this good cop, bad cop thing, like, you better tell us if you know the truth, or your kids are going to wind up ruining their lives. And, and then they're like, oh, honey, it's okay. It will take care of you. And I'm reading this and I'm like, what? But then all of a sudden they're like, well, you said, and they said something she said, and she's like, no, I didn't. And I'm going back and looking at this. I'm like, no, she didn't. And so then I find out, well, they're allowed to lie. People are allowed to say anything they can to try to get information or get a confession or whatever. And so,
yeah, that's how we get these false confessions.
Well, of course. And then, as I started looking more, obviously, because I was doing this, other people come with other cases, and I started looking into it more. A lot of times, they'll put these kids that I was reading cases where kids that are underage, they'll separate these 2 brothers that somebody's talking to me about, they separate them. They're like, well, your brother said somebody saw you, and if you confess, you'll be able to go home, things like that. And, that it just seemed appalling to me. So that was one of the things that was shocking. Another thing that I was really shocked about was how government informants are used. And that, for example, this particular individual was put up as like, oh, they're these heroes. Well, no, they're a lot of times like they're living double lives. They're doing crime. I mean, these are like shady characters sometimes, and they're getting paid money.
Mm-hmm.
They're being, getting reduced jail sentences. So that's the next thing that shocked me about.
Yeah, they're incentivized.
Yeah, it's like a circuit.
Right. Unreliable, incentivized witnesses. So that's the next thing that shocked me. I mean, is this okay to just go down the list?
Please, yeah, give us a couple more.
Yeah. I mean, all this because you work in this, but for a layperson, and you're right. I feel like I've been Nancy Drew. I've tried to be. I don't want to be doing this. Really,
Right.
I did not want to be doing this. I wish there was anybody who's hearing this. If there's a pro bono law firm that wants to step in, hey, we're very happy to do that. We've had different lawyers who have contributed time and helped. And the Innocence Project helped advise for a while, so there have been different people that, I always try to listen to and respect, but I would much rather just be documenting and letting somebody else take the lead. But at this point, I'm
Too late for that.
Too late for that. So, okay. So another thing that shocked me is the procedural things. And this is where I really give kudos to Gascon. We did an interview with him that hasn't been released yet, just on general stuff. I mean, he doesn't really know about this case personally. I just wanted to know about how the system worked. And he, one of the things I was really impressed with, like, he doesn't really care about procedural. If something's 9 days late, he cares about the truth. Is this person guilty or innocent? And, to me, that should be respected. That's how it should be. And so, one of the things that was Slim in his habeas appeal, because he didn't have money to file it, he had to turn it into the prison. They held it for 30 days to wait for a waiver. It wound up being 9 days late, and it was never looked at. It was dismissed for being time barred. And I'm like, how can you not look at something, and how do you not look at the truth? So those kinds of things. And of course, I understand the system is overrun, and you probably have thousands of people, claiming innocence that should be locked up and that are guilty. But, yeah, so that's one of the things that's disturbing and hopefully will be corrected. What else? I could tell you more things. The way the deals people are offered, that people are offered plea deals, and like people just line up, and it's like, okay, will you take this? Will you take this? Will you take this? And they're just like offering these like serial cracker prizes, plea deals, plead guilty, and people have to make decisions. Well, do I want to just go do 2 years or 5 years and say I'm guilty, or that kind of stuff? Right now, Charles Slim is in a position where there are new laws that could probably would lead to resentencing and maybe have him get released early or get released, period. But there are things where he would have to turn in and just it's the equivalent of a plea deal. It's saying, well, going through a loophole to get out. And he wants to be declared innocent because he doesn't want to. So he's been waiting, for 4 years, hoping to try to get, DNA tested, trying to get help so that his innocence can be proved and looked at and not have to go the route of like leaving jail with a record as though he did a murder that he claims he didn't do. And I believe him.
Why do you think it was important to chronicle Slim's journey to justice?
What do I think was important? Well, here's the other thing that I think that is unaware. There's a code of silence in the prisons and the gang, and you can't just be, one of the things that I respect, but it's frustrating also, is, Slim may have an idea of who did the murder. I don't know. He may have a guess about it, but he wasn't there. And so he's not going to go and speculate and point a finger and do to somebody else what got done to him, and circumstantial, or I think this. And so, once you start talking about that kind of stuff and you're in prison, you're putting your life at risk, you're putting other people's lives at risk. And so I feel like the prosecution needs to do a little more work in really looking into stuff. And, not expecting somebody to put their life at risk, you know what I mean, to defend themselves, or if they don't have money, it's just, I don't know. It just seems like the system's messed up. Okay. That's not what you asked me. You asked me, what do I think is important? Explain to me what you mean by that.
Yeah. Like, why did you think this was important to chronicle his journey? Like what stuck out to you that you said, okay, I need to pick up my camera and I need to document this?
Well, originally, like I said, it was part of the larger documentary we were doing. So we had quite a bit of material already on sort of the backstory of, the piecework. But when he was arrested for murder, just because, well, at first, when I was in court, there were some things that just were disturbing. And the gang expert, basically told me, and he got up and said on the stand that once a criminal, always a criminal, nobody can change. And I was so shocked to hear that nobody could change. So I went over to him after and I said, do you really believe that? And he said, absolutely. I said, would you be willing to say that on camera? Like if I need you in like a year or two? Because I thought maybe I might do something on it. He said, yeah. So I called him a year later. And I said, remember me? We talked. I would love to have you talk about why you feel people can't change. And once a criminal, always a criminal. And he said, okay, but you have to talk to my boss first. You have to get permission from my boss. I said, okay, who's that? And he said, his name is Captain Phil Tingarides, who later advanced far from beyond a captain. So I called him. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, well, it's fine with me if you want to interview him, as long as you interview me too. Because I want to say the other side, because I have seen people change. I have seen some of these men make incredible turnarounds and do work. He says, I don't know that I could have done that if I came from that background. So as long as you put my point of view on, yeah, you can interview him. So that's how I wound up meeting Phil Tingarides and did ride-alongs with him and sort of started learning on that side of it. So that I thought was pretty fascinating, right?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great answer that he wanted to give the other side of it. That's refreshing.
Yeah. Yes, and you can actually look him up online. His wife, Amada, is very involved in community policing efforts now. But I believe he's retired. He might have come back for a little bit. But there was a situation many years ago. It's fascinating where you could look online where a rogue cop, I think his name was Donner, who went astray, was
Dorner. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah,
Christopher
course. Dorner.
And he was trying to kill Phil Tingarides.
I forgot that he was the target.
I knew that name sounded familiar.
Yeah. And so the Bloods and the Crips came together. I don't know if they made a peace treaty temporarily or what, and they surrounded his house and protected him. He was that well loved in the community.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating when I started doing the background research on him. So as I started looking at the different points of view within the LAPD, within the city, and I started seeing the work that some of these guys were doing and getting to know a lot of them. I just, with Slim, I just, I'm not talking about a lot of specific things. So I don't know that would be appropriate, but there were
100%
witnesses that came forward and evidence that was discovered, and nobody would take it. I sent it off to the Innocence Project in San Diego. I sent them a box of stuff and they sent it back. It was too soon. I was like, oh my gosh. So it kept boomeranging back. So like, what do you do? Like, what would you do if you went in with like all this evidence and all this stuff? Like you go tell somebody, but there's nobody to tell. There's no lawyer. I didn't have $1,000 to go hire a lawyer. So I just started trying to get assistance wherever we can, including you. And people stepped in. A lot of people stepped in and helped. And now I think that, from my point of view, the case is solved. Now it's how to get the evidence into the court and how to, we're looking at getting the DNA that was never tested because that's hardcore forensic evidence.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.